Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ravade Reads. Now that I'm finished Daredevil Yellow, it's time to move on to the next part of the Marvel Colors series by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, and that is Spider-Man Blue. It follows the same format as Daredevil Yellow, but instead of Matt Murdock writing a letter to his recently deceased love, Karen Page, Peter Parker is making an audio recording for Gwen Stacy on Valentine's Day years after her death. So let's start off with Book 1, My Funny Valentine. The story begins with Peter swinging over to the bridge where he failed to save Gwen, placing a rose at the top, all while recording his thoughts of the cycle of good following bad and bad following good. We then flash back to a battle between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man. Norman has learned Peter's identity and plans on killing him along with everyone he loves, but Spider-Man stops him. When Norman wakes up, the Goblin persona is seemingly gone and Peter is naively relieved. He brings pictures of the fight back to the Daily Bugle when he learns that Norman has been sent to a hospital and volunteers himself to investigate for the Bugle. While at the hospital, he runs into Harry Osborn, Flash Thompson, and Gwen Stacy the first time the two see each other. Peter goes home and tells Aunt May that he's been trying to save up his money from the Bugle to buy a motorcycle. She tells him that her and Uncle Ben were saving up for him to buy a car, but since Uncle Ben used to ride a motorcycle, he can use the money for that instead. When Peter goes to buy it, Harry, Flash, and Gwen happen to be walking by. Gwen goes for a ride with Peter on the motorcycle, this being the first time the two actually interact with one another. There's also a tease at the end for who I can only assume will be Mary Jane Watson. Compared to Daredevil Yellow, I thought this was a stronger first issue. We had the villain set up the first time Peter and Gwen meet, and it feels like the story has a much stronger direction. Like Daredevil Yellow, I like the 60s aesthetic, making it feel old school even though it was released in the early 2000s. I did think it was very weird that he would want to buy a motorcycle because he's Spider-Man. Why would he want to waste all that money when he can just swing around? Anyway, now it's time for Book 2, Let's Fall in Love. Like the title implies, Peter is beginning to fall in love with Gwen Stacy. He recalls an earlier interaction of theirs in science class, making a date to go study at the Silver Spoon, which is like a meetup place that they have. Meanwhile, a mysterious character breaks the supervillain Rhino out of jail before his court hearing. When Peter is asking Jonah for an advance on the photos he's been taking, he hears from Robbie that the Rhino is loose, so he goes to get some pictures and, stop him. After momentarily stopping Rhino and chipping off a piece of his armor, he brings it to Dr. Connors to analyze. Using what he learned from Gwen in science class, the two create this serum, but at the risk of possibly turning Dr. Connors back into his other form, the lizard. Combining the serum with his web fluid, he uses it to melt off the Rhino's suit, finally stopping him, while that mysterious character watches from afar. Before Peter could leave to go study with Gwen, Aunt May stops him so that he could meet none other than Mary Jane Watson. This issue was okay, I guess. It had some classic Spider-Man action and set up a bad guy who I can only assume will be Kraven the Hunter based on how he's drawn, but the inclusion of Mary Jane just feels kind of weird to me. On one hand, she is the person that Peter ends up with after Gwen dies, and the two knew each other before then, but on the other hand, shouldn't we be focusing on the relationship between Peter and Gwen, which hasn't even really started yet? Moving on, it's time for Book 3, Anything Goes. Sometime after Peter and MJ first met, he takes her to meet the others, Harry, Gwen, and Flash, at the Silver Spoon. In Peter's recording for Gwen, he says he never did it to make her jealous, but that he just felt obligated to introduce her to them. It is clear that there's some level of jealousy between Gwen and MJ, but then suddenly the lizard pops up on the news, so Peter goes to take pictures for the Bugle, but MJ tags along. MJ distracts the police for Peter to sneak into the train station, but instead of taking pictures, he goes in as Spider-Man, where he finds Dr. Connors' wife and son who have come to visit, and his wife tells him where Connors went since she knows that he's the lizard. Spider-Man briefly battles the lizard before that mysterious character from before leads him out of the train station, escaping from Spider-Man. Outside the station, MJ calls Peter my guy in a way that makes him feel all tingly inside, I guess, before he goes back to Connors' lab to stop the lizard. While Dr. Connors' wife knows who he is, his son doesn't, so Spider-Man manages to cure him before they show up to see him. When Peter gets home, Harry is waiting outside for him to ask not only if Peter would want to be his roommate, but if he and MJ are dating. He tells him that they aren't, and that's when he mentions that Gwen likes him, something that Peter managed not to pick up on. Now I sound like a broken record, but once again, the issue, it's just okay. It's definitely not bad at all. I just think at this point I'm waiting for something interesting to happen, because so far it's just things I've seen in a ton of other Spider-Man stories. I'm only halfway through the series, so maybe it'll pick up, and maybe I'm just being a little harsh on it at the moment. Maybe I should just wait until I'm done the whole thing so I could look at it as a whole instead of going issue by issue, trying to give my thoughts that way. Now it's time for Book 4, Autumn in New York. In one of Peter's tapes, he tells Gwen how he never imagined having to bury her before Aunt May, and that her death was even worse than Uncle Ben's. In the past, Peter and Aunt May talk about him moving out to live with Harry, and Aunt May moving in with Anna Watson, who's MJ's aunt. In prison, Adrian Toombs, aka the Vulture, begins to have a heart attack when a fellow inmate, Blackie Drago, asks where he kept it. that it refers to the Vulture suit, which Toomes tells him before the guards tackle Drago. Peter helps Aunt May move in with Anna Watson, when at the same time Harry goes to pick up MJ. Peter tells him that he'll accept his offer about being roommates, and MJ says that they should throw a housewarming party. Meanwhile, that mysterious character from the other issues helps Drago escape from prison, who makes his way to and suits up as the new Vulture. Peter swings over to the party, while inside MJ is encouraging Gwen to get to know Peter more, and Flash Thompson looks outside to see Spider-Man, since he's his biggest fan. That's when Drago surprise attacks Spider-Man, leaving him beaten in the snow. The only thing he could think about was how he let his friends, especially Gwen, down by not being there for that housewarming party. Okay, so some more things happened in this issue. Gwen and Peter are getting closer to being with each other. This mysterious villain, who I still think is Kraven the Hunter, is behind all these various villain attacks. And it even ends on a cliffhanger. Maybe I was just being too harsh on the series, expecting more, when really it's just a crash course love letter to this era of Spider-Man, recapping stories most people already know, but in a new light. Let's go to book 5, If I Had You. Peter finally makes it to his new apartment after being beaten by the new Vulture. Harry lets him in, telling him that he missed the housewarming party with Gwen, MJ, and Flash. Peter collapses on his bed, telling Harry that the place is nice. Because Blackie Drago, the new Vulture, thinks he killed Spider-Man, which he obviously didn't, the mysterious figure who broke him out of prison to begin with goes to the hospital, keeping Adrian Toomes, the original Vulture, who was poisoned by Drago to gain information about the Vulture suit, gives him the antidote to that poison, saving his life so that he can go out, reclaim the mantle of the Vulture, and take down Drago himself. For whatever reason, while Peter is in bed sick from being stuck out in the cold and injured, there's a part where MJ and Gwen are fighting over his affection by trying to make him feel better, but they're interrupted by Peter seeing Drago fly by and tells them that they should probably go because, he needs to rest up. The two leave pretty angrily, and as Peter suits up to see what's going on, he sees Adrian Toomes flying by in his own Vulture suit, chasing after Drago. Remembering what happened to Uncle Ben and how he can't let bad things happen if he can do something about it, Peter swings out there to stop both Vultures from causing any potential damage. In the chaos, Peter saves Flash, who is wondering, what he's made of his life, before Peter goes to stop both Vultures. The issue ends with Flash telling the group that he has decided to join the army after being inspired by Spider-Man, and the mysterious character finally learns who Spider-Man really is by picking up his scent from a piece of his costume. All in all, it was a good issue. I figured we would have seen more of Gwen, since her and Peter's relationship is meant to be the main point of the story. Peter narrates a lot about Gwen, but we don't really see much of her in the past events. The final issue will hopefully conclude things nicely, since the mysterious character, who I'm sure is Kraven the Hunter, now knows who Spider-Man is, and hopefully we'll see more of Gwen in that issue too. Here it is, the finale, Book 6, All of Me. The issue begins with Peter awakening after having fallen asleep during his recordings for Gwen, and he narrates that he dreamt of her still being alive in the present day. Meanwhile, in the past, the mysterious character is made very clear to be Kraven the Hunter, who has studied all of Spider-Man's previous villains to learn from their mistakes and finally kill him. It's Valentine's Day, and the group are throwing a party for Flash before he goes off to the military. Gwen, MJ, and then Flash shows up with a ton of guests. Peter walks by Harry, who gets a call from his father Norman, who is now awake with no memory of being the Green Goblin. While Flash is making a toast, Kraven the Hunter crashes the party, now making his move on Spider-Man. But because Harry had used Peter's aftershave and Kraven was tracking Spider-Man using his scent, he mistakenly kidnaps Harry instead of Peter. Before Kraven can kill Harry, Spider-Man swings in to stop him. He asks why he went through all this trouble to kill him, and he says that he was honoring the contract given to him by the Green Goblin before he died. This is when Norman shows up to try and save his son, because like I said, he has no recollection of being the Green Goblin. Peter gets back to the apartment, and it's just him and Gwen. Gwen tells Peter how brave she thinks he is, that he was the only one who didn't run away during the party, and reveals that she was the one who gave Peter the Valentine's Day card at the beginning of the issue. The story ends in the present day, with Peter ending his recordings for Gwen, and MJ saying that she misses her too. This was definitely a more action-packed issue with Kraven the Hunter going on the offensive, which is funny because after all this setup, he turns out to be nowhere near as deadly as you'd think, given that he goes after the wrong guy and gets beaten pretty quickly. It was nice to see Peter and Gwen finally together, even if it was only at the end, which leads me to my biggest complaint about the series. It doesn't do anything to make Gwen interesting. All of the narration is about how much Peter loves her, but we don't really get to see any of that in the main chunk of the story, which is set in the past while she's still alive. Most of the time is devoted to Peter and Harry's growing friendship, the superhero stuff, and MJ taking the spotlight in whatever scene she's in. I guess the thing that makes her important is not her character itself, but the role her death plays in the lives of Peter, MJ, and Harry, and everyone else around her. Overall, I thought it was good though, but nothing really stood out to me, and I didn't really feel the emotions that a lot of other people felt. Maybe if I take more time to think about it, and if I reread it, I'll think differently. But at the moment, it just kind of was just things I've seen already. Don't get me wrong though, it's still good. It's a good sort of up-to-date version of these classic Spider-Man stories. It does change the continuity a bit, so I wouldn't say it's a substitute for those, but it does a really good job capturing the classic feeling, aesthetics, and tropes of older Spider-Man stories. So I'd say if you're someone who's interested in Spider-Man and you want to read more about it, I'd say this is a good starting off point, but not the end-all be-all of Spider-Man stories. So I'd recommend it to people who are sort of just getting into Spider-Man and want to read more. But that's going to do it for Spider-Man Blue. Thank you all for watching. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time when I continue the Marvel Color stories with Hulk Gray.